In this lecture, we're going to add the active class to our buttons based on the player's selection. The active class changes the background color of a button to green. At the moment, the player can't make a choice. We should update the button's background color to indicate the player's current selection. Initially, the first button should be selected. If the player presses the buttons for navigating the UI should update accordingly. Let's handle both scenarios. First, we'll start by setting the first button as the current selection. Open the dialog state. Scroll to the Handle New Choices button. The buttons should be updated after they've been added to the document. First, let's store the buttons in the buttons variable from the controller. If we don't store them in this variable, the player will not be able to navigate the UI. Set the controller.buttons variable to the following value, choicesGroup.queryButton. We're using the query method because we're selecting multiple buttons. As a reminder, the query method allows developers to select multiple elements, while the queue method selects a single element. Our query does not need anything else. We can select elements by their type alone. Using names or classes is completely optional. Most importantly, we're performing the query on the choices group variable. This variable should not contain any other type of element aside from buttons. The return value of this method is not compatible with the buttons variable. This variable wants a list. In contrast, our query returns a value with the uQueryBuilder type. Luckily, the results of the query can be changed to a list by chaining a method called toList. After storing the results, we can apply the class to the first element. Write the following line of code. Controller.buttons0.add-to-class-list-active. Firstly, we're accessing the first item from the buttons list. All items in the list are 0 indexed. The first item will always have an index of 0. After selecting the element, we're adding the active class. This line of code should change the color of the background to green. Next, we can start toggling the class during navigation. Luckily, we don't have to rewrite the code. We can reuse the navigate method. Open the UI controller file. In this class, we have a method called handleNavigate. Inside this method, we're toggling the active class based on the user's actions. Looking closely, the classes are being toggled on the elements in the buttons variable, which is where we're storing the buttons for the dialog UI. We don't have to make a single change to this method. It'll work completely with our UI. Let's prove it. Head over to Unity. Select the Game Manager game object. Inside this object, search for the Navigate event from the UI action map. Add the UI document game object to this action. Lastly, register the UI controller.handleNavigate method. Let's try playing our game. This time, talking with the NPC is a different experience. Upon arriving at the choices, the first button is selected. I can move around to change my choice. That's great. We've successfully moved around the choices in our story. In the next lecture, let's work on selecting a choice.